with who were also curious about the same sort of thing. And so there's kind of like a tiny group of us that just were teaching ourselves motion design along the way with a little bit of guidance from the instructors. And I think at one point I even had like an independent study or something that we were able to establish. And at that point in time, motion design was still a new concept. It like 3 years before, if you had wanted to do motion design, you needed to buy a $100,000 Silicon Graphics workstation or thing or something like that.
Wow.
And this was just getting to the point in time where you could do it on a Mac desktop. And as a result, there were lots of new businesses popping up, particularly in New York and in LA. I was able to get my way into the New York sort of freelance motion design scene, which was really, really hard for me to do. I think it was like 6 to 12 months of pain and
Oh
depression before
gosh.
being able to like properly land whatever my first gig was. But
Yeah.
once I did, it was very easy from there to kind of, make connections and navigate around that space. It's a very different landscape today. There's many more places that are looking for this work. There's much more established, I think, both from education to finding internships or finding your way into, various environments that would employ people for this work. But the only thing I would just advise is rather than doing this in a large corporate environment, like say like a television station
Mm.
or something like that, I would look more for studios or agencies or places that work with different kinds of clients on different kinds of projects so you can better get an understanding of like how this stuff works. Because it's basically because of the nature of this work, it's, partially kind of based on your creativity or your taste, but it's also partially based on your technical know-how and ability. And also a whole bunch of, eventually a whole lot of soft sciences come in terms of like how you interpret a client brief and all of these things. And to me, it's a place where your education never stops. I'm going to be I'm 43 right now, and I'm still learning along the way, even as I'm running my own business and whatnot. It's you never stop learning in this space. And as long as you're excited and enthusiastic about this work, which I'm
Yeah.
certainly biased, but I think it's a very easy field or line of work, or, compared to many other people that I know in my life, it's a space that's very easy to develop some enthusiasm and a sort of passion for that
For sure.
can
Yeah.
drive you through this. That's critical. And so from there, once you're in the field, you get a better understanding and orientation around it. But just, that jump from school into the field sometimes can be really challenging. And you just have to keep pushing and keep pressing, and you'll eventually make your way in.
For sure. Wow, you just answered like half of my questions that I had listed down already. Because I had a couple like personal questions I wanted to ask you before I went into like my thesis questions. So one of my other questions I had for you was like, so I saw that you do like a lot of freelancing and then like you work for yourself. So what made you decide like you would rather do freelancing as opposed to exclusively like working under like a big wig company and just taking all orders?
So it's a tricky thing, and I would be careful like how you think of freelancing, because when you're freelancing, like yes, you're working for yourself, but a lot of freelance work that can be done, you're working for either your own clients who are your boss, or you're working for an agency who is your boss, or you're working for, a team somewhere and whatnot. So there's a degree to which however you approach this stuff, um, I definitely wouldn't look at it through the lens of like, working for the man versus working for yourself and having more autonomy or more control, because at the end of the day, to do almost any of this work, unless you're one of the top three individuals in an industry of maybe a million brilliant creative minds. You have to be sensitive and empathetic to the needs and goals of others around you. And so when I started out, I was freelance more than anything because I wanted to make sure that I got a range of experiences. I eventually decided to go full time at a studio that I ended up working at for 16 years, which is super unusual in this field that anybody stays in one place for a very long period of time.
Mm.
The reason I started going full time at this place because I realized that being full time, I would have an opportunity to get a little deeper under the hood of the entire creative process. And when I was freelancing, it would be like, we want a pitch. We've got a client. They've already chosen an idea through the pitch process. Now help us execute it or whatnot. And I wanted to get a little deeper into the process of like, I wanted to hear the first requests that the client had. I wanted to help with every aspect of that pitch process. I wanted to really understand how the creative process unfolded from the very beginning, from the very first conversation until the final deliverable, and how that unfolds. In taking the full-time job, I was fortunate enough that I worked at a place where the owners of the business continually gave me a reckless amount of responsibility, and that
Ah.
helped my own personal growth and also allowed me to steer the studio that I worked at towards my own interests, my own, tastes and the things that I was into, and eventually, moved my way up through the company until I was the foremost creative member of the team and a principal of the company. I jumped ship from there a year and a half ago to start my own business, due to, some kind of like typical sort of things that people come up with like business and creativity, but also because I had a broader vision for a way that a studio could provide a service to clients in a way that wasn't really possible with the owners of the company that I was working for previously.
Mm.
So, I think that's a really long-winded answer. The most important aspect of going out and working and collaborating, whether you're freelance, whether you're full-time, is you can people will rarely get fired or kicked off a team because their creativity or their technical prowess or their taste isn't good enough. Like that almost never happens. What does happen is someone is difficult to work with or kind of an
Mm.
asshole or
Yeah.
doesn't, isn't good at playing well with others and or being empathetic to the needs of the whole team or the client's client or whatever that may be. And so that's just something that I always like to remind people of. It can feel when you're leaving school and heading out into the workforce, sometimes it can feel like you're a hot shot getting drafted into the NBA, and that may be the case. You may, be someone who has this incredible talent that people are excited to work with, but even in those circumstances, nobody likes working with anybody who's difficult or challenging or too kind of caught up in their own um, pride around their work and their process. And the work that we do in design, no matter what kind of design it is not art. It is using the aspects of art and creativity to solve other people's problems and challenges and to, guide them through a process. And so you just have to make sure that balance is always kept in mind.
For sure, for sure. It's not really like something that I've really thought about because I thought like after graduating and going out into the real world and looking for a job, it really was just all about like showing, I suppose, like your art and like your art style and what can you do. But I guess I tend to forget, like, especially if you're working for a client in the end, it's about meeting their needs and making sure they're happy with what you're making.
100%. And, as far as, I mean, portfolio is critical and super important.
Hmm.
My quick portfolio talk is you need to make sure that your portfolio has in it the work that you want to be doing. And if you haven't had a project in school or a tiny freelance gig or something that aligns with the work that you want to be doing, you have to make that work yourself and put it into your own portfolio, because people like me who hire full-time designers, part-time designers, freelance designers, whatever, those of us who are brilliant, creative visionaries are still terrified of hiring the wrong person. And although we should have amazing imaginations, we typically spend very little time when looking for someone that we are going to pay for help. We spend very little time using our imagination to try and like see the untapped potential inside of someone. We will get into a admittedly stupid mindset of like, oh, I have someone, I have a client who needs me to make something like this. Let me see if I can find someone who has something almost exactly like that in their portfolio or on their reel
Hmm.
or whatnot. And so I always like to remind students that the accountability is on you to make sure that your portfolio represents the work that you want to be hired for, because the people going through the hiring process, they're often people that would just rather be working and making creative stuff rather than like browsing through portfolios and trying to interview people and whatnot. And so
Hmm.
they are impatient, they're fickle, and they just need and they get depressingly unimaginative in that process. So make sure that your portfolio kind of speaks for itself.
When it comes to a portfolio, is it better to have a more broad spectrum? So, like throughout my time in school, I've done like a lot of different things like illustrating, graphic design, motion design. So, right now, my portfolio kind of has like a mixture of those things, but I want to go into the film industry.
Mhm.
So, would it make more sense for me to have a portfolio of just motion design slash film related projects as opposed to like the whole broad spectrum of things that I have done so far?
It is, you definitely want to have a portfolio that's pretty targeted. I
Okay.
think, again, it's rare that like I'm browsing portfolios and being like, ah, I need someone who's got motion design skills, but also has a background in sculpture and maybe is a good
Mhm.
illustrator as well. And maybe they have some interior design work in their portfolio. Like, I'm looking for like, I need a motion designer who's good with typography, or I need a motion designer who maybe can do a gritty handmade look or things like that. And so you can have a range of capabilities, but I think you need to really choose what you're going after and try to anchor everything around that, or hone in on the pieces that are, focused on that. Um, for me, portfolio, I would rather see, and particularly, with motion design, it's almost always a reel is the most important part. I would
Mhm.
rather see a really short reel that has 30 seconds of awesome stuff on it than see a 3 minute long reel that shows everything that the person has ever made. Like, I don't want to see anything except for your absolute best stuff. And that's important to keep in mind as well, because I think sometimes we feel like, oh, we need to show every single thing. I have to stuff the suitcase as tight as I can. And sometimes it's better just to have something that's like lightweight, clear, and also won't confuse me in terms of like, is this person a motion designer or are they just a illustrator or a fine artist or whatnot?
Okay. Well, yeah, so I definitely have a lot of polishing up to do then. Okay, so now I have some questions in regards to my actual thesis project.
Hmm.
So I wanted to ask, can you tell me like what your beginning process is like when you're asked to work on a new project that's within filming or within like the film industry?
Sure. So I've done all different kinds of projects in the film industry, everything from designing title sequences to designing fictional technologies and gadgets that the characters in the film will be using and often are like designed and implemented as a visual effect. And I've also done things like creating like almost conspiracy montage sequences within film that are like a blend of editing and lots of design elements and newspaper headlines and maps and old documents and things like that all sort of blended together. Step one is hear what your client is looking for. You need to be very, very, very empathetic towards your client and really listen to everything that they have to say. You want to understand that on a film, um, when I'm going into any creative process and I have to pitch my ideas, it's very nerve-wracking.
Mhm.
I'll get very insecure in the moments leading up to a pitch or a presentation or whatnot. When a filmmaker, even one of the most famous filmmakers in the world, they will be the same exact way. All, as far as I'm concerned, every creative person I know has bouts with insecurity. And so you need to understand what it is that you can do, that you can contribute to the filmmaker's film that will make them more proud of their film, of their project, that will enhance their project for them in the ways that are important to them. So, for instance, I've done a million times over, pitched the team at Marvel on a concept for a title sequence. And when they are providing the brief, the single most important question that I will ask them that already sets a very positive tone in the relationship, which is not that like, I'm a brilliant creative who, because you're asking me to make your title sequence, I'm going to try and make my own portfolio piece and then hand it to you to stuff into your movie somehow.
Mhm.
Instead, what I am saying is, tell me about your film and now tell me, is there a challenge that you're having with your film? Is there something that you wanted to convey that you don't think is coming through? Is there something all the time you guys have to cut things out of your film? Was there anything that you loved dearly but had no choice but to remove from your film? Tell me about those things because although maybe not exactly or precisely, maybe there's some way that we can capture some of the spirit of that in the title sequence or the conspiracy montage or whatever element there is.
Mhm.
So that sort of having that sort of empathy and sensitivity towards your clients and making sure that you're going through the exercise of not obsessing over how am I going to make a cool piece for myself or even how am I going to impress this person, that you're staying focused on what's the most important, mission at hand here. And that could be, if somebody said, hey, we need you to um, design a ad to go into a local newspaper, you want to be saying like, okay, well, like what kind of fonts do you like? Instead of that, it should be how do you want people to feel when they turn the page of the local newspaper and see your ad? Or are there challenges? Is there a reason that you're buying advertising space as opposed to using another method to help your business? What are you trying to achieve here? Try to use that as the pathway towards your own creative problem solving process.
So it's less about asking design-based questions, it's more about empathy-based questions in a sense, where you're asking them questions like, I don't know, I guess just how to make people happy, as opposed to thinking about, oh, what kind of font or what kind of colors do you like? It's more about what kind of feeling do you want first, then we can dig into
Yeah, and you can
the
dig into
design
that
based.
sort of stuff, but
Mhm.
you want to be careful, and it depends on who your client is. If you're working with an ad agency who has a art director that all the time works with motion designers, that person may be like, "Oh yeah, let's talk about fonts and specific texture assets and color schemes and that sort of stuff." They may want to talk about that all day long. But then someone else that you might be working with may not have that sensitivity towards the space that you're working in. And so it's also important to assess in the collaborative process, okay, is this someone who understands my space really well and wants to get really deep into those gritty details? Or is this someone that doesn't understand those things? And think about, there's going to be something in your life that, there's a certain kind of dish that you like to cook or something. And if you're you're visiting someone else and they're cooking that dish, you may want to like lean in and be like, oh, have you ever tried mixing in this or whatnot? Like that may be the case. And then there may be a different dish that you know nothing about at all. And you'd like nothing more than, when you're at a restaurant for that chef to come over and explain to you the dish and explain to you why they're making the choices that they're making, as opposed to the chef coming to you and being like, do you think I should add more salt or more garlic? There's like there's a big difference there between those two kinds of services being provided. And, again, there's a time and place for each of them.
You really got to read the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So for my next question, I know you dug a little bit into like when it comes to collaborating with the filmmakers and like based on like how they feel. So how do you collaborate with the filmmakers to make sure like the technology enhancements that you design serve the narrative instead of like overshadowing it?
That's super important. I mean, there's it's I think you've already heard a lot of the nuances from me that go into that. I mean, it is just having a perspective and understanding, where it can fit in, approaching the collaborative process for something like that more as less as like, here's some glowing blue shit to take over your whole movie, and instead trying to say like, here's some ideas, here's some thoughts. Are these useful tools to you in your filmmaking process? Will these things help you convey exposition or enhance the production design or whatnot? There's a number of different ways to kind of approach that. But, even in the way that you've asked the question, I think you understand, like, you want to put yourself in a position where you're not just making stuff that could overshadow other attributes that are going to be important to the filmmaker.
Have you had any moments where like you would pitch an idea and like a team or someone like didn't agree with your vision or your idea that you had?
Yeah, all the time. It's common, and it's a creative process. It can be a subjective thing. And so in those areas, you have to be a great partner to that person. If you hired a wedding planner and the wedding planner, told you that it was going to be their way or the highway, you would probably fire that wedding planner,
Mm.
right? Like you want someone that's going to be a partner that can, work with you. And so you have to accept that you're not always going to be aligned with your clients or your stakeholders. You have to accept that that's a natural part of the creative process, and that, constructive feedback is part of it. And you have to accept that. You have to accept it with grace. And if you're good at what you do, you take that feedback and you don't ball it up into some, rage or anger or passive aggressive hostility when
Mm.
you sit down to make your revisions or your changes based on that feedback. You take that feedback and you say, I can see the way that this feedback is going to improve what it is that I'm making. And I'm going to use this feedback to elevate what it is that I'm making. Now, there's other aspects to it too. You can take that feedback and try to really, really understand, why is that feedback being delivered? And, again, sometimes a client may be prone to give almost too much detail with the feedback. When I'm working with filmmakers who they themselves may not know a lot about motion design or typography or things like that, I never want to say, well, if you don't like that font, tell me what font you want and we'll put it in there.
Mm.
I just want to say, like, well, why don't you like the typeface that you've selected? What sort of, where is it missing the mark for you, or what kind of mood would you, are you wishing that it fit more into? And sometimes we can, when we're upset by feedback, our instinct is to be like, well, then tell me what it is exactly that you want. And sometimes that's the
Mm.
wrong thing to do. Like, that's the
Yeah.
the chef coming over to me, and, when I could say, like, I don't like these sort of, spices or whatnot. instead the cook being like, well, tell me exactly the recipe that you want me to make for you and I'll go make that. That's going to result in something that makes everybody unhappy.
Yeah, so ability to control your emotions is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also just comes with experience.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're all creatives, we're all insecure, we all take this stuff seriously
Mm,
in our own ways. And over time you develop, you won't be as hypersensitive to the kind of feedback that you can receive.
for sure, yeah. Okay, so I have one last question for you.
Hmm.
So do you have any advice or good tips for someone who might feel a little lost as to what they should do after graduating, especially for the graphic design peeps or just any design people in general?
I mean, that's a relatively vague question. I think, in this sort of space, I think you need to find the things that excite you and inspire you. And if there isn't something in the space that you're already enthusiastic or inspired by in terms of like, ooh, that's the kind of design that I wish I could do one day. Like if that's not coming through to you, then like I would even be so harsh as to say, well, maybe design isn't your thing. Maybe there's something else there. Maybe there's another space that you could be applying your discipline towards. And that's totally fine. But I think to succeed in design, I expect that every person needs to have some bit of that passion for it that is motivating them and pushing them towards it because otherwise there's many different levels of design that you could do and they're all serving a purpose in many different places, but I think you don't want to sign up for anything if it's just going to be sort of going through the motions because this was, you figured you would study this at school and you were, oh, well, I realized I wasn't going to become a famous painter, but I guess you can make money doing graphic design, so I guess I'll do that and then I'll get whatever job is, I see a posting for in my local region or whatnot. Like you need to have this is the kind of design I wish I could do. This is the kind of design I would be proud to tell others that I do. And I'm going to do whatever I can to teach myself and understand, how that space operates and how it functions and do everything that I can to get closer to that space or that community or the kinds of roles or jobs that I'm most interested in.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I like really look up to you because I'm 4 years into this graphic design thing now, and my seventh semester, and all of a sudden I find this new thing that I'm really interested in, motion design. And then I'm like, oh, I really want to go into the film industry. And then I realized there's like a film degree that I can go for at New Paltz. So I'm like, wow, I feel like I just wasted 3.5 years of my life. Like I could have been doing this instead. But the other thing is, without graphic design, I feel like I wouldn't have been able to find that passion in the first place.
Hmm.
So it was just important for me to figure out like what you did outside of graduating, and just I feel like the transition is very different, especially based on like the curriculum that we have at New Paltz compared to like what I want to do like all of a sudden is just like totally different. So I'm like, oh man, like where do I go from there? Because obviously the curriculum that I'm being taught doesn't exactly like line up with what I'm interested in. So that's where I kind of had like a wake up call. And it's like, okay, well, it's time to stop relying on like what I'm getting taught at school. I should really be doing this like on my own time and learning everything myself outside of school.
Yeah, to me that's table stakes. Like that's like you have to be doing that to um get particularly far in a space like this. The other thing is, you know, film, like motion graphics for film is, for many people, that is a very competitive space. For many people, that's sort of like the highest execution of motion design is to do motion design for film. That's just an opinion that some people have, but because of that reason, it's a very competitive space and it may be a mountain peak that takes a while to hike towards it. But
Mhm.
all of these, like it's, I would presume that it's challenging to sort of say like, okay, I'm going to graduate from school, I'm going to look for jobs doing motion design for film. Many of the people that I worked with in my career were amazing motion designers that had been working for, more than a decade into their careers before they could land their first film project.
Mm,
Um, that was the way it was for me. And I just took every single other motion design gig or opportunity that I could along the way and pushed it as far as I could. So, you want to I do love motion design because to me, in comparison to just, I guess, traditional graphic design, like this may not be the case anymore, but at least when I was starting out, like the worst motion design gig that you could get, like the lamest, most uninteresting gig in motion design was still a hell of a lot more exciting than the lamest gig in print design, which might be, you know, laying out classified ads in the newspaper or working at a sign shop or something like that.
mhm,
And, it's a motion design is a discipline that I also spend a lot of time talking to people about being very flexible and being something that isn't a singular track. Like start working in motion design, see if you can work your way to film motion design. It can branch in so many different directions, whether that's through marketing, through entertainment, through digital experience, digital products. I've found fascinating niches that are just close to my own interests and passions. I love cars and automobiles. My father's a racing instructor, and so I geek out over anything automotive. And I've found a way to take my what was a motion design career and turn it into, I imagine next generation experiences for digital products, including automobiles, which now all have screens inside of them that require there to be animations and design of information that's legible and clear, but is also conveying information or geography or whatnot to the audience or the user or the driver or whatnot. So
mhm,
to me, motion design, it's an awesome like Swiss Army knife of various skills that are kind of
mhm.
blended together towards a singular result.
No,
So
for
don't
sure.
feel bad about missing out on some time in the film program or whatnot.
Yeah. Because I'm also very much like, I'm graduating. Now I gotta go out and I gotta get a job. Like, I can't be wasting
Mhm.
any time.
Yep.
But I suppose it's more of like a gradual, like you make your way up kind of thing.
Get whatever job you can.
Hmm.
If you have to, wait tables to pay bills, that's fine.
Hmm.
If you can get an internship or a crummy job, but it's doing something closer to the field that you're interested in,
Hmm.
do that and just know that you're there temporarily and choose to leave there and go to something else after 6 months or a year.
Yeah,
And rack up those experiences because those are all a critical continuation of your education.
for sure. Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
I
I'm very
learned a
sorry. My
lot.
schedule's been super hectic and whatnot, so I'm sorry it took so long for us to chat, but
No, no,
happy
no,
to
absolutely no.
connect.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so, so much. All
Well,
right.
good luck finishing up. Keep working hard, challenge yourself with the things that you're most interested in. And yeah, have a wonderful time finishing your degree.
Oh gosh, thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you, you too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.